Hi everyone, my name is Marius and today I'll be recording video form in a series of videos called ABCs of Securing the Branch Edge with routers. Alright, I'll be still using the VSR as an example going forward. And just a very quick note, side note, if you have not watched video 1, 2 and 3 and you get confused in video 4, I suggest that maybe it's a good idea if you would jump back to video 1, 2 and 3 to just rehash what we've spoken about. In video 4, it's an extension of what we've done in video 1, 2 and 3. Right, so it's like I said, a series of videos, So just a very quick rehash. What we did in video 1, right, we actually spoke about different concepts, access control list versus something like the ASPF inside the actual device. That's more a packet filter, the access control list, where this more turns into like a type of firewall functionality with adaptive security that we're starting to see. We then took this information, this ASPF, and I actually set up a policy for that, right? And that was in video 2, and I did the configuration of ASPF. We bound that to an interface, and we had quite a simple network that we used for that. Right, so that's where we started exploring ASPF. But what we also discussed in video 1 was something called a zone-based firewall. Alright, that's an extension of the more complicated the network environment control, the more control you need, the higher up the stack you would get. For a very simple environment where you only wanted to permit or deny something, access control list works fine. But where you get more into a secure type environment, more firewall functionality, ASPF would be good. Right, then in zone-based firewall, alright, we started looking at how we can get into more complex type environments, networks and so forth. So in video 3, I started exploring that as well, and effectively we did the zone-based firewall functionality. I explained what a zone-based firewall was, how it worked, how you actually put different interfaces into zones, right, and how that affects the actual device itself. Very important that you just realize at this point once again that we still needed to create some type of detect mechanism, and there's two types of ways of doing that inside the zone-based firewall, and one of that would be ASPF. Right, so that's what we discussed in video 3, and I actually used it as an example of how to use ASPF together with a zone-based firewall to achieve certain goals. Alright, in video 4, what we'll be discussing today, I'm actually going to extend that a little bit further. We're still going to work on the concept of the zone-based firewall. Alright, but this time what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use object policies. Alright, I'm actually using an object policy. As I discussed in the previous videos, we mentioned that this would be something like classes that we're going to create, and in those classes we could reuse in the actual infrastructure. This is moving really now more towards an actual functional firewall setup, right, where you would actually identify certain concepts inside the actual network, like IP addressing. Subnets would become a class, right, different subnets. So I could always reference a class. It would be easy for me then if I've referenced a class 10 times throughout the actual my object policy, right? If I needed to change that class by adding an IP address structure or maybe removing some IP addressing from it, it's a very easy way just to change one class, and it affects basically all the policy, right, components that actually use that class. So as you can see, from a longevity point of view, it makes more sense then, to actually move into object policies. The one thing about ASPF, you would have seen that we actually applied that to the interface directly, right? And also we could also apply ASPF to a zone-based firewall. So when we use object policies, the one thing to just take note of, a very quick side note, is that the object policy cannot be applied to an interface directly. The only ways I can apply object policies is in a zone pair that we've discussed over here as well. So if you want to reference back and actually look at the other videos, you would see in the right hand top corner there, I've made some actual tags there where you can go back into those videos easily. Right, maybe just spend some time there and watch them. It makes a bit of sense, to go through them. Good stuff. So without further ado, let's then move into this. So like I said, in video 4, right, like video 2 and 3, it's going to be configuration driven. What I'm trying to do, if you've watched any of my videos, is it's very easy for me to jump in here and create a very complex network and just throw configurations at you to look really clever, alright, which I copy and paste in. That's not my idea today. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you how the object policy is built up. all right, how they actually construct this whole thing, so that when you move into a more complex environment, you actually understand how the actual object policy references, different parts of the actual internet network as well, and so you understand that better. And that's my whole goal today, is to really try and get you to understand that. So the best way to do that is to create a very simple network and then build out that network as we move forward. Okay, so moving forward from this point, what we're going to do today, or I'm hoping to do today, is we're going to have a router. It's called zone-based firewall. It's already been set up, this infrastructure. I've also got router A and I've got router B. Alright, they are interconnected with each other. Like I said, this is a VSR, a virtual services router setup at the moment. This is, if I maybe change color there, it makes more sense. Giga 1/0. This is Giga 2/0, and this is a Giga 1/0. Why is that important? Because at some stage you're going to see I'm going to reference these interfaces, alright, and then you know where they fit in. Then we do this, we say this is a 10.1.1.0 network, and this is the 10.1.2.0 network here. IP address specific is 10.1, this is 2.1, this is .100, just some clarification there is just to keep it easy. Okay, why am I using routers right now? Well, the concept right now is not to build out this HTTP network or to the internet, whatever. The concept is just to show you how the policy works. The easy way for me to do that is to use routers as VSRs instead of servers. For you as well, to start up a router like this takes a couple of seconds versus setting up an actual server with HTTP and all those things. And just to prove the concept, alright, it's good enough for me. I can actually very easily use things like ICMP, Telnet and so forth, right, to show you how I can permit and deny traffic. Good, like I've discussed before, guys, everything is built around a policy. This is most probably the most important thing in your network here, because right now this is set up and it's allowed, all traffic would be allowed. I can telnet from B to A, I can telnet from A to B. As a matter of fact, I can telnet to zone-based firewall if I remember correctly. I can ping through this network, and as a matter of fact, I can send TCP traffic through as well. Right, whatever traffic. The only function this router is doing right now, I said router, is the fact that it looks at this routing table and says, well, if I have a route, I'll forward the traffic. Right, remember what I've said in video 3 is that once you start putting interfaces into the secure environment, it starts to deny traffic. So a policy is made up of a couple of things. First of all, it's got an action. Right, the action that a policy has is very simple. You've got to think about pass and drop traffic. You either want to pass something or you want to drop it. It's simple as that. Right, there are some other things where we can inspect and so forth, but for now, the concept is, do we want to pass traffic or do we want to drop traffic? The next thing that we have to look at is we have to look at the information that we have, which is from to. So source and destination. Right now, at the moment, what we have is we pretty much have source IP to a destination IP. Right, so what I'm starting to drive towards is, what if traffic goes from B to A? The default behavior in routing is if I can get from B to A can get to B. But what we're saying in security is B might be able to ping A, but A might not be able to ping B. Remember that from the actual video 2 that we spoke about ASPF. Okay, because we don't necessarily want traffic to come from the outside in. So that's very important, is our different sources that we are going from, our zones. So for now, you'll see we're going to talk about this zone here. The zone is going to be the trust zone, and this will be the untrust zone, just for now. Okay, so from that perspective, I'm going to say I'm going to trust traffic originating in B going to A, but I don't trust any traffic coming from A to B, and that's why we look at the source destination pairs. And this is all based on application. Right, so that's very important for you to identify what applications are allowed to move from B to A. Alright, and as I said, for this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do ICMP. That's just a very easy way of doing it, and I'm going to use something like Telnet, alright, to apply this as well. So these are the basic building blocks of our security that we're going to set up. Right, like we said before, we can do this with ASPF, and we have done it with ASPF by applying this to an actual interface itself. But for today's example, we're going to go to the zone based firewall functionality, and inside the zone based firewalls, as you've seen before, we're going to start creating a zone pair. Now a zone pair effectively is a flow of data, and if I'm saying the policy says I want to go and pass traffic from let's make it B to A for service type, right, let's say at the moment service type telnet. What's important is I need to somehow apply this to something, and that flow would be from B to A, because we're not saying that we're going to allow traffic, telnet traffic from A to B. So you have to create a zone pair, and a zone pair pretty much says that between trust and untrust, right, and then inside that you're going to start applying different concepts. You will then bind this policy. Okay, this now moves me into the object policy. Right, so I'm just going to make some space there for us so we can just get some things written down. So effectively what we're going to do is I'm just going to quickly get rid of some of this information here. Right. And I'm just going to rewrite our policy so it makes more sense. I want traffic to pass from B to A, right, for, sorry, that's really ugly. Let's give it a go again. For application ICMP, and that's it. Okay, I don't want drop everything else. Okay, so I don't want traffic flowing from A to B, and I don't want traffic flowing from zone-based firewall to B. Okay, because that's also a component as well. So effectively that's what we want. We want to go from B to A for ICMP and telnet, everything else is dropped. Okay, that's my policy. Easy enough. Okay, how do we do this at the moment? Well, we said we need an object policy. And inside the object policy, effectively, I can do this for either IP or IPv6, which is IPv4 and 6. So for now it's going to be IP, and I'm going to give it a name. My object policy at the moment is for traffic flowing from B to A, so let's call it BA. It just makes a little bit of sense in my head, okay? And inside this object policy, we're going to have object groups, right? So for the object policy from IP, right, for B to A, I'm going to say anything coming from a source of B, that's my first component that I need. I'm going to need an object group for this, going to a destination of A, right? I want to basically apply service type, and my service type for now is, let's call it general, G. Okay, so in general I'm going to apply those two concepts for my services. Okay, why I do this is because you'll see if I set up the object groups, I can start, when I start applying more interfaces here and more concepts, I can very easily reference A, B and G again if I needed to. Or I could also create different flows for different places on different zone pairs. So this is part of that whole concept of creating the classes. Okay, so to achieve all of this, I will then bind this object policy at some point BA to some type of zone pair. We'll be getting back to that just now. Okay, so if we then basically have, I want to make a reference here, this is reference 1, this is 2 and 3. So I've got to create the object groups. Yep. So I'm going to say object, you're going to see this in configuration just now, group, and for the object group 1, right, what do we want to verify? Well, effectively what we want to check is we want to see the IP address of B. So I'm going to say here this is IP address, and we're going to call it B because we are referring to B there. Yeah, that's number 1. So let's put it there. Object group IP address B. What are we checking in object group IP address B? Well, we're going to say network subnet 10.1.2.0 24. Wow, okay, so that, why do I do it this way? Well, if I want to change this in future, let's say I have multiple devices here, or maybe even some more networks that I'm going to add in future. Alright, it's very easy for me to go back to the object group IP address B and add subnets here as and if where required. Alright, so I can really go and build this out, and wherever this B is applied as a policy, it wouldn't have to basically have to go make all the changes to all the different rules that we've set up. That's why I said this is for the more control environment that we want to set up. So that's one. Two, I'm going to replicate this object group. Please, I'm not going to write out the whole thing. I'm going to say IP address, and I'm going to say network subnet, and we're going to say 10.1.1.0.24. So now we've created A as well as B, and all we need now is the service type. So this is where things change a little bit, right? And that's why you'll see that we haven't set this up before. We haven't done that. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is an object group service, and we call it G for now, right? And then within the service I can add and subtract and move applications that I want to basically add to this. Remember that when we create this object policy, there's going to be a pass or drop. So whatever I put in here as a service will be passed, because I'm going to say that that is going to be applied as a pass, as a traffic that is allowed to go through. So you'll see that I'll actually have two applications in my service. Right, so object group, and basically we're going to say service at the moment. That's different. Remember, we're not doing IP address, right? So we say service, and we've got to give it a name. And for now, I'm just going to call it G. Okay, it's easy to reference. That's number 3. And inside this object group service, right, what we'll do is you have to now match some type of application. And we're going to say here service, ICMP, and telnet. Okay, what I'm not going to do right now, this is incorrect, CLI incorrect. This is not the actual context itself that we write it in. I just want to get you to think about this. We want to do ICMP and telnet, and when we get to the configuration, I'll show you how we reference the two different ones, right, and how we do it with another object group within this object group. I can reference up to 4 object groups inside an object groups, 4 levels of object group, right? So that's just for your information at the moment. So once we have set this up, we basically have this rule set up. That sounds like a lot of work just to get to one rule. The thing is that if we want to reuse any of these components, it's very easy, and if we want to change anything inside these components, it's really easy to do in future. So as this changes, right, the policy says, okay, for now it's ICMP and telnet, maybe in future it's HTTP. I don't have to rebuild all of this. All I have to do is just go and add another service for HTTP. Okay, once I do that, wherever this is applied to whatever, from that point forward, it'll work. Okay, and that's what I talk about, you know. So initially there's a lot of work to get this whole system set up and this whole environment, but thereafter it becomes much easier than creating just a whole bunch of access control list entries, you know, one after the other, permit, deny, permit, deny, whatever, and you go through this 1000-line access list to try and figure out if you're allowed to HTTP from B to A. Okay, and as you can see right now, this is just much more hierarchical and control, you know, from the configuration point of view. So once we've done all of that, what we'll do is we'll then basically set up the zone-based firewall component, right? And basically, like we said before, you've got security zones. For now, I'm going to use the security zones that basically I'm allocated to by the actual router itself. And if you remember correctly, we had the local, we had the trust, we had the untrust, and we had the DMZ. For now, trust and untrust is good enough for me. Okay, I'm not going to worry too much about the other ones. So I'm not going to create new security zones. What I am going to do is I'm going to reuse the current security zones that's been created for me by the actual system. Then I'm going to, the only funny thing is, the only thing I have to do then is create a zone pair. Right, and that zone pair is pretty much going to be, well, going from B to A, right, from trust to untrust. And I'll call it actually from B to A. I think it's quite a nice way to call it. And then I'm just going to apply the object policy to the actual zone pair. And that will be it. And that'll be done. And then we're going to do some testing. Okay, so I've spent quite a bit of time here, but I think it's nice to see how everything references each other. And as we go through the configuration, like I said, programmatically, this is what I want to fix over here. From a CLI point of view, you'll see how we do that. Slightly different. I don't have enough space on this page to do that, but I'll show you how we get that done. Okay, so let's go and prove a couple of points here. The first thing I want to do is, I believe that this is router B. Yeah, and I think this is that zone-based firewall, and I should have a router A. Okay, so for now what we're going to do is from router A, if you remember, if I do a display interface brief, it should have an IP address of 10.1.100 on gigabit Ethernet 1/0. Remembering that there's no configuration setups, it's going to be on A and B. They're just there as endpoints. We're going to do some stuff from there. Going to B, let's quickly check there. Interface brief, sorry about that, display interface brief. What you see is it's 10.1.2.100. And if I ping 10.1.100, I should be able to ping it. And like I said before, at the moment I can telnet to it 10.1.100, and I can get into A. And the way I've set it up, if you go a question mark, is I've only gone into user level 1, okay, not user level 15, just to show you that there's a difference between two. Okay, so I'm actually now connected to A, no problem whatsoever. I can quit out of it. As a matter of fact, what I can also do is I can actually telnet to my zone-based firewall. Right, because if I do a display interface brief here, you'll see that this is 10.1.1.1, and basically I can tell it to 10.1.1.1. That's my zone-based firewall, and if you do a question mark, you'll see that's also very limited functionality on there. I don't want to change anything, I just want to use the example that I can get there. Okay, so you can see that I can pretty much get everywhere. My zone-based firewall can ping everybody, and there is display ASPF, right? All, it's not configured. Okay, so nothing has been set up at the moment. I'm not running anything. Display zone pairs at the moment, zone pair and security, and I believe that I can enter there. Okay, there is none at the moment. There is no security zone pair set up. Okay, so just to show you that at the moment I haven't got anything set up on the zone-based firewall. Okay, so this is standard routing. It's got routes and that's it. Okay, so let's start setting up our policy. So what we're saying is the first thing we want to do is going to system, of course. I'm not too worried about these two at the moment, yeah? But what we can do, I think that should be interesting. Ping -c, I'm going to 10.1.1.100. Okay, should be going at there at the moment. I know there's going to be a while before we do that, before I apply, so let's not do that now. Okay, let's first set up our policy. I think that's why we're going to be distracted by this ping going on. Object, like I said, there's two options here. I've got group and policy, but first of all I want to set up a policy. Okay, so for now the object policy is either IP or IPv6, as I mentioned to you before. For now we're going to use IP, right, just showing you that it supports both of them, and I'm going to give it a name. So my object policy that we said was, if I remember correctly, we call it zone-based firewall, yeah? No, object policy was IPBA, going from B to A. Right, that's it, so love it. So object policy BA, and inside the policy I have to reference, right, certain things. And like we've said before, what we want to reference is basically, from a policy point of view, is some type of rule pass or rule deny. So let's start with a rule pass, or let's start with rule. You can give it a rule number, right? For now I'm not too worried because I'm just going to use one, rule pass. And we're going to say, what do you want to basically pass? Right, as you can see inside here, we've got counting destination IP, we've got source IP, and we've got a service. That's the three very important ones that we have. Right, so coming from source IP going to a destination IP, right, equals service. Now the destination IP, I'm going to show you right now, coming from the source IP, right, the question mark there is basically any source or a name. Right. Don't make a mistake of thinking that this source IP address object group, this is not the actual IP. Okay, I'm just going to reference something. So for now, I'm going to reference B. Right, or I can also say anyway, but or any. So I can say rule pass source IP B to a destination IP A, right, and I can specify the service. And they said service was G, general. Enter, and that's it. If I do display this, I have rule 0 pass coming from source IP B going to destination IP A service G. Really think about this, because the more intuitive you make this right now, think about this from a troubleshooting point of view. How would somebody sit back, in a time of crisis and really reference this and look at this and go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Going from B to A. If you start putting complex things in there, like, weird IP addressing or weird naming, people can get confused in troubleshooting. Keep it as simple as possible. Yes. Okay. From a troubleshooting point of view and from a security point of view. So, what we do know is, what I have to reference now is, if I quit out of this, I have to create the object groups. So 3 object groups for now. Object group, if you look at the object group, there's a couple of things we can set up. It's either IP, IPv6, port, or service. Right, for now I said I wanted to set up the IP address. I didn't just go back to show you. There is only address available over here, right? And this is where you specify the actual name of the actual object group. Why we don't put the IP address in there right now, like I said, otherwise we'd have to create multiple object groups for every single subnet. You don't want to do that. So we set the object group IP address B, for now my first one, the source, alright, and that's it. Then inside that, I'm going to reference the actual network. So network, inside the network, what do we have? We either have an object, a group object, we have a host, range, or subnet. For now, I'm going to go and say for the subnet, you can understand the difference between them. If I have a range between IP address 10.1.1 and 10.1.1.10, I'd use range. Yeah. For now, I want to use the subnet, and inside the subnet, I have to specify the IP address subnet with, of course, a subnet mask. So what is B? 10.1.2.0.24. Done. So let's quit out of this, and I say I want to create A. So object group IP address A. Let's make it uppercase, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and this time it is for 1. Okay, and then I said I want to create object group G. Right, it's still IP, okay, but wait a moment. I wanted to pick this up and go, wait a moment, this is not an IP address, it's a service, isn't it? So this time what we're going to do is object group service. That is different, yeah? And I'm not specifying IP or IPv6. This time I'm going to give it a name of G. I hope you got that one there. Done. Okay, now we want to permit, at the moment, ICMP. So we're going to specify the service. And if you hit the question mark there, you see there's not much in there. It's TCP, UDP, ICMP version 6 and ICMP. Okay, and you'll see that the Internet Control Message Protocol is 1. So I'm going to say service 1, just to show you the differences between them. Service 1, so all ICMP is effectively allowed. Right, but I want to do telnet as well, very specifically telnet. Well, I can specify a protocol number with an integer, or I can go back into group object, and I want to show you that. So service, group object, and if you then hit a question mark, there is all of it. Okay, there's all your different applications. Okay, so service group object telnet. Okay, and that's it. So if I do a display this is my configuration, service ICMP and service group object telnet. Like I said, you can go 4 levels deep at the moment, but for now that's basically the setup you want to use. Yep, because we said, remember that HTTP only came a little later, so I'm not going to put HTTP in here for now. But if you wanted to, right, you could do HTTP. That works well. Okay, and you can do HTTPS, so depending on how you wanted to set this up, and you also can do port numbers as well for specific applications, or if you changed basically your HTTPS from 8080 to whatever the case may be, you know what I'm getting towards. Okay, so it gives you a lot of control in here. So now I've created all 3 the components that's needed for the object policy. Right, and they also bound to the policy because I've referenced the actual A, B, and G inside the policy. So that's been set up. So what do we need to do now? Well, if I display security zone, at the moment, like I said, there is no zone. So remember what we said before in video 3 is we said, well, unless you create the first security zone, there will be no default zones. The reason is because this is an actual, the way that the actual operating system works is that once you create the first security component, only then does the actual security operating system part of it actually kick in. Alright, so you first have to create the security zone. So security zone, we said we're not going to create new ones. We're going to use something like trust. Okay, and sorry about that. That should be name trust here. Good, that's done. If I now go back and I do display security zone, I suddenly have the four: trust, DMZ, untrust, and local. Remember, we can't apply anything to local. We can, however, apply things to trust. What do you apply here? Well, what do you want to be trusted? Well, we're not going to go IP addressing anything like that. Remember, we are looking at interfaces right now from a zone-based firewall. So if I go very quickly and I just click on here, we said that interface gigabit 20 should be trusted, gigabit ether 10 should be untrusted. And that's what I'm talking about. Okay, that's what we want to get into. So from a trust point of view, security zone, name, trust, right? What we want to do is we want to import an interface, gigabit ethernet, trust is 2/0. Okay, and I want to do the same thing, untrust. Okay, now I'm in untrust and I want to also add an interface. This time it is 1. Okay, right now what can we do in this network? I wonder. I know the answer. Of course, I've tried this before, but I wonder what we can do. Can we still ping 10.1.1.1? No. 100 myself? Yeah, that's it. Ping still works, but I can't do 1. Can I do 2 the other side? No. Remember, you've seen this before, guys, and girls, whatever. You've seen this before. Is as soon as you put an interface into a secure environment, a firewalling function, deny, deny, deny. I've said that before. Okay, and this is what I want you to really focus on, is that this is now denying. I can't get anyway. Try and telnet. I know you know what's going to happen. Telnet, I know 1 or 2.100. Okay, it says connected, but what's basically happening is there's no return back, back. So this guy's really trying to push back. It's trying to connect. This guy is saying, no, 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 I'm dropping all the packets. Okay, well, the only way we can apply this now is to a zone pair. So what I need to do over here, I really have to create a zone pair. Okay, and that's important. So for now, we're going to say zone pair, and what do we want to call it? Well, for security purposes, yeah, absolutely. The source is going to be something called trust, yeah? And the destination is going to be called untrust. Now I've created a zone pair, right? And so from my point of view, I've got a zone pair, and I now have to apply the policy to it. So I say object policy, apply, right, and IP, and what's the name of our policy that we call it? It was BA. Okay, so let's see very quickly here if we can ping 10.1.1.100. I can ping him. Can this guy ping me? No. So what I'm trying to show you is this is pretty cool, eh? Because that means that it's working. Because if I do a telnet from here, 10.1.1.100, I can telnet to A. Alright, at the same time, A cannot get to me, to B. And that's what we said in the policy. And it's exactly the same thing that you would do if you wanted to now add one more application to your services. You would just go to the service component, which is G, and just add that over there. Okay, and the nice thing about this is if you get into complex environments, right, where you start to add a DMZ to this infrastructure, you could reuse A, you could reuse B, you could reuse the different zones, right? You could reuse services, or you could create a new service called DMZ, whatever the case may be, right? And in DMZ, you could basically permit FTP, right? And then you would basically create zones there. So I want to talk about that very quickly a little bit. If I get back into my drawings here, sorry about that. So let me reiterate that. So what we said was, what if we actually added a DMZ zone here and we added an FTP server? Well, what would you have to do to get this working? Remember, if you used access lists, this would get very complicated at some point. If you had flat access lists that's applied to one interface, it gets very complicated. Okay, because you're going to start creating multiple access lists for inbound, outbound, and so forth. What we've done is we've created the trust zone, we've created an untrust zone. What you have to think about in a policy point of view is, okay, wait a moment, another part of the policy is going to be, well, I want traffic to flow from B to this environment, the DMZ, that is permitted for FTP, and vice versa from the outside in. Right, for FTP. I needed to really look at this and say, well, how do we do that? Well, you're going to have to create zone pairs for this, because at the moment you only have a zone pair from B to A. Then you create another zone pair, and that zone pair says, well, maybe from B to DMZ, and you have to create another which is from A, right, to DMZ. And then you would create a service, let's say call it DMZ, and inside service we have an application, an object group for FTP. Alright, so this is how you start to create flows inside the network. Forget about physically connected interfaces, but flows. So by adding, right, all of this together, you just have to create 2 additional zone pairs and an additional service. And then what you've got is, you see with object groups, what we do is you then apply the new object policy, which would be B to FTP, apply it to the zone pair. And B to FTP would basically say, coming from a source of B, going to a destination of whatever FTP would be, let's say that would be C, right? And with a service of DMZ. And you would do the same thing from A to C. In that case, you know, if A was the internet, that would be any. Okay, I think we all understand that. But anyway, so from that perspective, but you could also restrict it to a specific public IP addressing only. So that's how you start to get control of this network, and that's basically how you use object policies, object groups, right, together with a zone-based firewall. I believe the best thing for me to do is to maybe then, you know, in a video 5, not now, in a video 5, look at maybe some type of use case where we turn this into the internet, where we basically have an FTP type environment, you know, and we basically set this up in configuration. So then you can reference that as a configuration. But for now, I think I've given you enough information to play with, to think about, and to go and try and replicate. Right, I hope you found this to be a useful video. And like I said before, you know, please reference videos 1, 2, and 3 if you're not quite sure what we spoke about. And please don't hesitate at all, you know, to give us a shout out. If you do like the videos, you know, it's just nice for us to know that people are enjoying the videos. But more importantly for us is please let us know in comments if you want us to do something else, if you want us to basically add to these videos, or if you have a specific use case you want us to build for you. All right. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Cheerio. Bye-bye.